I'm going to be talking about how to do some sewing. So for this, you'll need a pin cushion, that's this tomato part. You'll need some needles, which the pin cushion would already have 4 needles on there for each person. And one of the needles should have a needle threader. You'll also need some thread. And of course, you'll be needing some fabric if you're going to actually be doing a sewing project. But today, first, we're going to practice on paper like this. So for your thread, please make sure that you find the end of your thread from the spool. And if you can't find it, don't just cut the thread, because then it's going to ruin the rest of the thread. If you can't find the end of your thread, then ask a friend. And if they can't help you either, you can always come ask me. So please make sure that you don't cut the thread on here. Now you're going to take the end of your thread and take one of the sewing needles, and you're going to try and thread it into that hole. It's going to be very challenging. I would like you to try it to see if you can get it. It's kind of a challenge. But if you are having a really hard time, that is what the needle threader is for. So you take the needle threader and carefully stick it into the hole. Now this wire part is in that hole of the needle. Now you're going to take the end of that thread and put it into that hole of the needle threader. The hole's way bigger than the needle's hole, so it should be a little bit easier. Pull it through, and then you're going to pull the needle threader and the thread right through the needle hole. Now if it gets stuck, like mine was a little bit, if you pull it with that handle of the needle threader, it might break the needle threader. So make sure that you're pulling the wire part if it gets stuck. So pull it through.
Wow.
And once the whole needle is threaded through, then you're all set. You can take the needle threader out. Now please make sure that when you're finished with the needle threader, you put it back where it came from. So take one of the needles, if there's any left in here, and poke it through so that you don't lose it. So now I have a needle that's threaded. So I'm going to now cut this thread. So my recommendation is to thread the needle so that there's 2 strands, double strand, all the way until it's about as long as from your hand to your elbow. Even if you're doing a bigger project, if you make it longer than that, a lot of times it gets tangled and it gets kind of frustrating. So I would just cut it off with about the length, again, from your hand about to your elbow, maybe a little bit longer, but not much. So now I have a needle with 2 ends of the thread coming out like this. So now I have my needle and 2 threads coming out of there. Now we're going to tie the end into a knot so that it doesn't come apart when we start sewing. Before we sew, we need to make a knot on the thread. To make a knot, you can just make a regular knot like this. I'm going to tie both my ends together. And you might want to tie it a few times if you're going to do it that way. That way you can make sure that it doesn't fall apart. Another way to make a knot is to make a loop, twist it, and pull the twisted part of that needle down. And then that makes a knot. So that's another way you could do it, whichever is okay. If you know other ways to do it, you can also try that as well. So now we're ready to start sewing. Okay, so I'm going to show you how to complete this sewing practice sheet that we'll be gluing into our sketchbooks. So first you'll want to fold this in half. It's okay if it doesn't match up, that doesn't really matter. This is going to be the front and this is the back. So we're going to keep our worksheet page this way. So I have a needle that's threaded and both strands are coming from the needle, and it's about as long as from my hand to my elbow. That should be enough to do this practice. So first you'll want to make a knot on the end. I showed you a few different ways to make a beginning knot for sewing, so you can try either one, or if you know some other methods, you can try it your own way as well. But before you sew, make sure you make a nice knot. And then pick up your needle, get your worksheet, and you're going to just follow the pattern. Remember that when we sew, we are going to go up, down, just like we did over, under when we practiced paper weaving. It's the same idea. So where it says one down with the double circle, you're going to use your thread and go all the way until your thread stops because there's a knot. Then where it says two up, you're going to start at the back and aim for that dot in the middle where it says two up. You're going to pull it up, and then you're going to repeat that process. 3 down, 4 up, and if you accidentally poke where the hole's not supposed to be, if it's close enough, just keep going. If it's not, then just take it out and try again. It doesn't have to match perfectly. Remember that these workbooks are just practice to develop your skills in using these tools and materials. So I'm just going up, down, all the way. And eventually, if you choose to do a sewing project, you will be using the same exact process, except of course, you'll be using fabric instead of paper. And actually, I think sewing on fabric is easier than paper because you won't have to poke as hard. Okay, so I'm at the end of my rectangle worksheet here. And in the next section, I will show you a few different ways to end your sewing with different kinds of knots. Now I'm going to show you a few different ways to end your stitching. So if I start sewing here, and let's say I want to end right here. Then one way to do it is to go back under the last stitch like this and pull it through, but not all the way, so that you have a little loop like this. Now you're going to go under that loop like you're tying a regular knot, and then you'll go under it one more time and under the loop again. And then now there's going to be a knot here that will come apart. So you can take your scissors and cut that off. I'm going to make that a little bit shorter too. It's best to keep your beginning knot and your end knot on the same side of your sewing. That way it's going to be neater because only one side is going to be messy and the other side will be nice and clean. Here's another way to end your stitching. You can take your needle and put it right next to the last thread that's coming out. Then you can wrap it around your needle 2 or 3 times and then hold that down with your nail or finger and pull it through like this. And then when you lift your hand up, you'll get a little knot. So that one's a little bit quicker, but it takes a little bit of practice. Next one, I'm just going to be tying a regular knot. Now this is an option if you try the other ones and it feels a little bit challenging and you want to make sure that you have enough time to finish it. Tie a regular knot on the back like this. Now you will see that if you do that, this method, there's going to be a little gap between the knot and your last hole, so it will come a little bit loose. So that's the disadvantage of this technique. So I would like you to try out a few and pick your favorite and use it for your sewing practice worksheet. So now when you're finished, please glue this into your workbook so that you can remember the skill. And now we have to clean up. Whenever you finish your sewing, I would like you to make sure to not take out the rest of the thread. There's a few reasons for that. One is that somebody else might be able to use this, so we don't want to waste this thread. Another reason we want to keep this on here is because when you put it back into the pincushion, if you have a thread on here, it's less likely that you'll lose this needle or push it down too far. So please leave the thread on, and please poke this needle back in the pincushion where there's that black dot. There should be 4 black dots on each pincushion for each group. When you press it in, don't go all the way. If you do, you might lose that needle inside of the pincushion. So keep it up a little bit. And make sure that you put your threading tool back on the pincushion by putting the needle through the threading tool and poking the pincushion. Your thread, don't tangle it all up, just kind of loosely wrap it around and put it back in the thread area. Your little thread scraps, if there's long ones, you can put it in the fabric scrap bin. If you find any little ones, these can go in the trash can.